Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona at the time we record this, getting ready to see the second to last spring training ball game of the year. I'd like to think that as we look at baseball season, when everything is possible yet again, there's nothing that you could say that would piss me off. And yet here I'm going to ask.
Hold my beer.
The same question I ask every stinking week, and you're going to piss me off. So here you go. What's new and exciting in your world this weekend?
Well, it's round about this time of year, every year, that students start picking their colleges for the fall. And one of the things that people spend a lot of time looking at, particularly prospective students and their parents, are the U.S. News and World Report rankings. Of course, there are lots of rankings from various institutions, but U.S. News and World Report is the gold standard of college and university rankings. And what's interesting here is that a number of big-name schools, first Yale, then Harvard, most recently the University of California, have dropped out of the rankings. And by dropped out, what I mean is they have refused to submit the information to U.S. News that U.S. News needs to put them in the rankings because they don't want to participate. The arguments that are given are all sorts of things, ranging from the claim that the rankings are biased against programs that try to increase socioeconomic diversity, to the claim that the rankings insist on including factors that are irrelevant to quality education, to the fact that it's easy for schools to misrepresent their numbers and thereby game the ranking algorithms. It seems to be the case that we're coming to this point that the colleges and universities themselves are saying that the rankings are useless.
A certain grouping of colleges and universities are saying that, the very grouping that never needed them in the first place to do their bidding.
Exactly, yeah. I started to notice something weird. This would be going back a couple of decades, when all of a sudden all sorts of small schools were claiming they were number one in the rankings. And it's number one, and then you have to read the fine print, among colleges in the Northeast.
Yeah, no, schools founded on a Saturday by a Presbyterian in Louisiana.
Right. Everybody can be a number one in something as long as you define the space small enough. But what I want to do here is offer three metrics that parents and students might look at as they think about ranking institutions. And the three metrics I've picked, and you may have other contenders you could think of, I picked these three specifically because they are more market metrics. By market metrics, I mean these are numbers that arise from people's behaviors as opposed to some institution putting a number on the college or university. And the first of these is the retention rate. The retention rate is the fraction of full-time students at the college or university who return the following year. What this is measuring is the student satisfaction, and it's different than asking the students, do you like the institution? It's actually looking at what they do. Did you choose to go back to this institution after experiencing it the previous year? The average retention rate for the United States is 75%. Anything over 85% is very good, and the elite institutions have 90%. So retention rate is one thing you can look at. A second is the graduation rate. That's the fraction of full-time students who graduate within 4 years. And that's showing the ability of the institution, everything from academic advisors to professors to the red tape surrounding what courses count for what requirements, the ability of that institution to deliver a degree's worth of education within 4 years. The average for the United States is 60%. 70% plus is good. Elite schools are above 75%. And then lastly, I'd point to the endowment per student. The endowment, of course, is money that's given to the institution principally by alumni. And the institution will use the interest on the endowment to fund its operating expenses. What the endowment per student is measuring is a number of things. One is the likelihood of students receiving scholarships. The more endowment per student there is, the more able the institution is going to be to provide scholarships for students. Another is the academic rigor, interestingly, because the less the institution is dependent on tuition, that is, the more it can rely on its endowment rather than tuition, the less apt administrators are to put pressure on professors not to fail students. Thirdly, it's a measure of alumni satisfaction in the same way that the retention rate is telling you what students that are currently there really think of the institution. The endowment per student is telling you what the alumni think of the institution. After they've graduated, they've gone out, had their careers. Those that are more satisfied are more likely to give to the institution. So for the numbers, the median endowment per student is $75,000. Highly selective private schools will be $200,000 and up, and elite schools $1 million and up. Harvard is noteworthy. I believe they have the largest endowment of $40 billion. Divide amongst their 20,000 students, that's $2 million per student. Harvard has so much of an endowment that it can afford, I guess it did several years ago, announce that anybody who gets into Harvard coming from a household of less than whatever it is, $60,000, $80,000 of income, gets a free ride. All of them. To find these numbers, all you have to do is go to Google, type in the name of your favorite institution, and say retention rate, or graduation rate, or endowment per student, and these things will show up.
I don't think a high retention rate is a good thing.
Oh, tell me why.
Because if you start with the observation that any number of students don't belong in college and they're not doing college-level work, you can't then turn around and say a high retention rate is a good thing. Because what you're saying is a bunch of these are still coming back next year, and we all agree that they shouldn't.
What the retention rate is showing you is the degree to which the current students like the institution.
That's not the way to look at this. The retention rate is literally showing you how many of them are coming back. And as you and I both know, when you're dealing with college students, most of them are coming back if they're able to. Whether they like it or not, all that much is irrelevant. Most of them aren't going through the trouble of transferring out into another school, into another program.
Yeah, and so what's important here is not the absolute number, but the relative number. And that's why I say the average for the U.S. is 75%. So don't consider 75% good. 75% is average.
You're making a numeric observation. I'm making a normative observation. We should be failing out many, many more people than we do at universities across the entire spectrum. And we don't, because what we care about is making sure their college experience has been enjoyable to them. How do I know this? Deans have told me not to fail students. What percentage of students should actually graduate from college? At the schools I've worked at, and granted, I've never worked at the Harvards and the Princetons, where I'm sure the number is much, much higher. But I've worked at state schools. I've worked at small liberal arts colleges. You know, for my money, the answer is about 35-40%. That's what the graduation rate should be. Now, there's all kinds of shenanigans that parents should be aware of. You want to point them to this idea of a 4-year graduation rate, and the colleges will move to a 5-year graduation rate every time you let them get away with it.
Right.
They have more requirements with each passing year, and the more requirements you have, the more impossible it becomes to graduate in 4 years without taking overloads every semester.
One of the things that we agree on is that it matters a lot more what students do when they get to whatever college they're at than what college they go to. So saying, you know, I was accepted to a top 10 college or whatever is almost irrelevant. What matters is what do you do when you get there? If you're a serious student at a state university, you're going to get a far better education than an average student at an Ivy League institution.
We've got an interesting wrinkle with home buying all of a sudden. When mortgage rates were below 3%, it was a real seller's market. There was almost nothing that a buyer could hope to demand under those circumstances. Now that mortgage rates are at about 6.6, it's a different universe. There's an interesting thing going on right now. There are get-out-of-jail-free clauses that buyers are writing into mortgages, whereby in the time between the day they sign the deal and they close the deal, if they lose their jobs, they can back out without penalty.
Oh, wow.
And granted, we're not looking at a particularly long period of time here. That's what, a month at most?
Yeah.
And yet, people are so concerned in this market that they're going to make $1 million+ commitment and then the next day lose their job in a way that they couldn't have predicted 3 days before.
Yeah.
You can tell that there's a certain kind of fear percolating through the markets right now that we haven't experienced for quite some time. How do you know? People are insulating themselves against it as best they can. And because it's now no longer a seller's market in the same way that it once was, right? Sellers could just drop things onto the market and they would be snapped up immediately. Not that it's exactly a buyer's market at 6.6% either, but you take the point. All of a sudden, buyers can make some demands that they couldn't have made just 6 months ago. Which, of course, Antony, brings us to the foolishness of the week. If you were paying attention to my Twitter feed, you should at least have some inkling where we might be going. I had what I would consider to be a very unfortunate interaction with a young lady a couple of days ago about Cuba. She was telling me how wonderful Cuba is and how terrible Western democracies in general and the United States specifically are. And I just kept asking the same exact question: when will you be moving to Cuba?
Right.
Because here's the thing. I hear people say these things, and there's never a line to move to Cuba.
But there is a big line in the other direction.
There is. That's right. Let's put it this way. You don't have to fight the masses to get in line to move to Cuba. However, if you want to leave Cuba and come to the United States, people very typically get into rafts, and they try to brave a 90-mile ocean trip in a raft to get to Florida.
Did she have any response to this?
She then said, well, life expectancy is longer in Cuba, and by the World Health Organization numbers, that is correct. The World Health Organization, I'm sure, is taking Cuba's word for a lot of the metrics here.
There's something interesting about life expectancy numbers. They can be counterintuitive, because if you have, as we do in the United States, a much more advanced medical system such that sickly children who otherwise would have died in utero actually make it to birth, and because they're sickly, there's a greater proportion of those who will die, you'll get a lower life expectancy rate.
We all watched the Michael Moore movie. We all know that Cuba has a better medical system than the United... Oh, wait, that's just fucking ridiculous. No, it doesn't. But here's the thing. She kept going on and on and on and on about how capitalism kills people. And I finally said, look, no capitalist ever took all of his customers out and put them all against the wall.
Yes, right.
That does not happen. That's what socialists
It's bad for business, right?
That's what communists do. Capitalists rarely kill their own customers. It just doesn't work out long term, right? And you can point to the couple of examples where that did happen. And my goodness, that's a cautionary tale for the rest of them, not a recipe book. I found an article today. Cuba holds a stacked election amid the biggest population exodus since the revolution. But there is one thing here that tells the entire story. Nearly 250,000 were intercepted at the U.S. border in the 12 months ending in September. Here's the money sentence. About 2% of the island's total population, and up more than 400% from a year ago.
2%?
Of the entire population of Cuba not tried to escape to the United States, but was caught escaping to the United States.
Put that in perspective. If that were the United States, it would be 6.6 million people caught trying to escape to Cuba.
That's the number that got caught, not the number who tried.
Out of curiosity, the woman you were arguing with, had she ever lived in Cuba? Does she have any firsthand experience?
You'd think she would have offered that if that were true. As usual, I'm left just saying the obvious thing. If you're going to tell me how wonderful something is, and the rest of the world has been telling you it's not for decades, the onus is on you to live according to your words. If you think it's that great, please go there for a while.
Yep.
Not a week. Go there, live there for a while. See if you can get food. See if you can get medical care, right? See if you can buy a car, these sorts of things. Can you find a place to live? Can you afford to go out for an evening?
If you do that and you're still of the opinion it's better, by all means, come on Words and Numbers. I would love to hear what you have to say.
If you do those things, I'll listen to you all day long.
Yeah.
Because definitionally, you'll know more than I do.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. If you're a full-time college student looking for something educational, fun, and free, apply to join me and James and several faculty who have appeared on Words and Numbers at the inaugural summer seminar on the theory and practice of classical liberalism. The week-long seminar is hosted by the Stevenson Institute at Wabash University and will be held June 5th through the 10th. There's no charge, and meals and lodging are provided. To apply, see the link in the show notes. Randy Simmons joins us this week. Randy is professor of political economy and director of the Institute of Political Economy in the Department of Economics and Finance at Utah State University. His book, Beyond Politics, The Roots of Government Failure, is a primer on public choice theory and practice. His 2012 book, Green versus Green, examines how local green activists use green ordinances to stop green energy development. Randy joins us this week not to talk about the environment or public policy so much, but rather baseball, and that despite the fact that he is a self-avowed anarchist, he ran for and held public office.
We're here with a very old friend. Randy and I have known each other for quite some time. As a matter of fact, he gave me what I refer to as my first big boy job in academia. Given that it's close to opening day of baseball season, my mind goes to two things: the Boston Red Sox and the bitter disappointment they will visit upon me, and Randy Simmons, who, as a professor, I think you were even department chair when you pulled this nonsense, decided he was going to become mayor of a small town in Utah called Providence, Utah, a town I later lived in and rather enjoyed, one of the most beautiful places on the face of the planet. What I knew of Randy back in 1999 was that he was a bit of an anarchist, a guy who doesn't believe government should be doing much of anything at all. And yet you ran for mayor.
Yes, I did.
This is like an atheist joining the seminary.
That's right. Perhaps you can explain yourself right now, because I've never really gotten this. So in front of these tens of thousands of people, what the hell was going through your mind?
Moment of temporary insanity. This is a really hard one to answer, James. I had gotten basically drafted into being on the city council to replace somebody who had moved. Then I had run for re-election to the city council and then ran for mayor, but only one term.
Were you out there knocking on doors and saying, "Hi, I'm Randy Simmons, and here's all the reasons why you need to vote for me"?
I knocked on doors. I said, "Hi, I'm Randy Simmons. I'm running for mayor. Here's my brochure. If you have any questions at all that I can answer right now, I'll answer them for you. Otherwise, go to my website."
As an anarchist, your brochure was not a blank piece of paper?
No.
What kind of platform do you run on?
I couldn't use these words, but basically I was running on the platform of the city should leave you alone and not take your stuff. The guy I was running against was a complete no-growther. He wanted to make it impossible, basically, for anyone to build on their property. We were on the edge of what looked like fairly rapid growth and development of farmland into subdivisions. He thought that was terrible and that people shouldn't be able to do with their property what they wanted. In some ways, it was a property rights platform. He's a guy that I actually quite liked, but he just thought that he knew better what people should be doing with their lives than they did. And basically, I ran to run against him.
You become mayor, and this is one of the great oddities that an anarchist could become mayor. But if you're running on a platform of property rights, I guess I can see how that might come to pass, especially if your opponent keeps right on helping you.
Yes.
You've accomplished a lot, and people should read your book, Beyond Politics, which is quite a good one. But I lived in Providence, and every day I would drive to Logan and I would pass by a couple of things that you don't really expect to see in a town like Providence. I would pass by one of the finest Little League fields that I have ever seen. It was gorgeous. The grass was perfect, right? Everything about it was just beautiful. Even the advertisements pinned to the outfield wall, everything about this stadium reeked of somebody who really loved baseball. And this, I later learned, was your gift to Providence. Not only do we have an anarchist making his way to mayor on a property rights platform that everybody kind of accepted, but then you went and gobbled up all their tax dollars and built a big giant Little League stadium with it.
Well, the park was already there. The Little League field was there, and next to that there was a full-size field. But the full-size field when we got started was basically a softball field, didn't have dirt on the infield, and the equipment the boys were wearing was awful. The catcher's gear, seriously, was being held together with baling wire. Yeah, and there was a snack stand at the park. It was open occasionally. It was managed by the city. The first thing we did was we went to the city and said, could we create a 501c3 nonprofit to run baseball in town? And will you let us use the fields and use the snack stand? And they said, oh, somebody please do something there. And so we did. My wife and another parent ran the snack stand. We turned it into a seriously money-making venture, and we were able to buy really good uniforms for the kids. I think at that time, I may have been Scoutmaster as well. One of my kids needed an Eagle project, and there was a church that was doing some expansion, and we're going to dig up a bunch of lawn. So for his Eagle project, he ripped up all the sod at this church. The boys hauled it down and laid it out. So we had a grass infield.
That's really cool.
Yeah. The grass there is still the same grass.
How about that?
It's a large field. One of my friends took charge of that. What happened is these kids that had come through the Little League then needed bigger fields to play on. And so this friend of mine organized a fundraising effort to raise all the money to turn that softball field into a really high quality baseball field. Then we also ran another fundraising effort, and this is all private money, to build the big field and to rebuild the small field. It may have been the best Little League field in the state.
It was gorgeous.
When I became mayor, soccer was competing with baseball for that same field.
Boo.
So they'd lay out their soccer field on top of my baseball field. And I said, I've got to get these damn commies off my baseball field.
That's right.
And
That's exactly right. They take what they want and they think they're entitled to it, and they got to get the hell out.
There was a guy who owned some property adjacent to it. I asked him, said, why don't you donate that property to the city? We'll put soccer fields on there. And he liked that idea, but he wanted a bigger tax break. And so he applied to have that property rezoned from ag to residential, brought in a subdivision plat. We approved it. Then he donated the property to the city.
The miracle here is that he didn't turn right around the minute he successfully got it rezoned and put up a lot of houses and sell them all.
Yeah, well, he kept his word.
The rezoning presumably was to raise the book value of the land, so he has a bigger tax deduction?
Yes.
I want to keep your anarchist bona fides intact here. Did you pull this off, the whole thing, through volunteer labor donations? It didn't cost the city a dime? Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly.
Even the tax credit wasn't a local tax credit. It was a federal tax credit.
It's federal, right.
Ha! That's wonderful.
Antony always jumps to the end of the story. I was kind of hoping to keep hammering away at you for abusing the people that you allegedly serve. Of course, now we all know that you did not abuse them at all. But you did build this gorgeous stadium. And I want to take a backward step here. You said you had this snack bar and that it made a whole ton of money. How much money does a snack bar make?
We'd have to correct for inflation, but when we first did it, so just before you moved to town, we were making $10,000 a summer.
Wow.
That was $1,999.
Right. These days, it's slipped back into the city. The city runs it in large part because the state and federal governments want you to have food handlers permits. You have to go through all kinds of training to allow people to be working in the snack stand. And
to make a hot dog.
yeah, we were just using parents and siblings.
For those of us who love baseball, and I know, Randy, that you're one of those people, and I am too, there's something about opening day, that whole week, really, that makes everything old seem new again. It's the most optimistic time of the year, and everybody's filled with a certain kind of goodwill towards one another. It's really something. When you built this gorgeous stadium, did you change the fabric of small town life to some degree with it?
I thought that we did. It became a place where people could come and hang out in the evenings. You know, a couple of years ago, I was down at the park and I saw a couple of guys sitting there night after night. And I thought, I don't know these people. And asked them, and they were retirees from Massachusetts. They came to the ballpark every night just to watch baseball, to hang out at the park. It's a pretty fun place. There's actually a coda to this story because some of the kids who came through that program now are old enough that their children are that age and they're all coaching baseball. So I go down to the park and it's like my grandkids are playing in the sense that they're all kids that I coached. One of them has become the high school baseball coach. He raised last year about $1.5 million, all private money, to completely rebuild the high school baseball field and put in lights. All private money. I like to think that it's part of because he was part of that whole experience coming through, that he's now carried it on to the high school field.
Two fantastic legacies here, right? The first one, to keep growing local baseball, which is, I think, way more important and way more wonderful than most people really stop to think about. But then to do it in the very right way. getting private money to do it, not putting a gun to anybody's head to force them to do it, which is what taxation is, but to allow people who want to come and help. And $1.5 million, you got to be kidding me.
It's astonishing.
I want to go back to your time as mayor. You come into the mayor's office as an anarchist. Does your experience there change your opinion of anarchism?
What it changed was I teach public choice. I teach about incentives in government. You don't really recognize those incentives. I mean, you recognize them intellectually, but not viscerally until you're in the middle of them. I did not run for re-election, primarily because I realized how much I liked being called Mr. Mayor. I talked about the city as if it were something more than adding up all of the people in town. It was this entity, the city. I thought it was bad for my soul to stay there. It's just so easy to just get caught up in, well, we could do this and we could do that. It would all be wonderful and we could spend money over here and money over there. It's easy to get caught up in it. I did one other thing, by the way. A developer said to me, you know, the city ought to have a splash pad. I said, well, why don't you raise the money for it? He did. It's just tempting to find ways of trying to achieve something, to create a legacy, to spend other people's money.
It's interesting listening to you. I teach public policy also, and we talk about government crowding out. The idea that government taxes people, uses the money to do things, and because of that, people have less money that they're able to donate or do things with themselves. But you're describing something that I haven't thought that much about, and that's kind of a psychological crowding out.
Yes.
If the government's going to step in and spend money, then I, as a citizen, am less likely to think in terms of raising money or donating. Instead, I'm going to come to you hat in hand.
Exactly. Our county has a recreation, arts, parks, and zoo tax, RAPS tax. Watching all the cities fight over that money every year, I often said to myself, well, why aren't they out raising the money themselves to do those things? But if they could get that money, they didn't have to.
Yeah, what's the point of breaking my back to raise the money when I can just come to you?
Right.
You did, I think, Herculean work raising the money to deal with the field problem. And I'm not surprised. You're an anarchist and you got some standards and you try to live up to them. That's a rare thing for anybody, let alone somebody who's in office. To have you sit here and admit that it was tempting to spend other people's money. We're all the way back to Plato and the ring of Gyges, right? If you've got this special ring and you twist it and it makes you invisible, what do you do? And every single person says, oh, I would never use that. We all know that almost everybody would use that. How do you resist when you're sitting there in the moment and you know you can? What are the things you tell yourself to get away from that thought?
Not only are you sitting there in the moment, but you have a room full of people right there with you, wanting you to do X.
How do you talk yourself out of being a hero?
I did it by not running again. It may be a cop-out, but I thought it was bad to stay.
And therein lies the political science lesson. Good people will run away from this. Good people won't even involve themselves in this for the most part. But anybody who, like an idiot like you, decides, well, maybe I can make a difference, going to take one look around and get the hell out of town as soon as you can, one and done. Who doesn't leave? Who doesn't talk themselves out of not participating? It's the kind of person you would prefer not be in any kind of control over your life.
But there are people who really believe they know better than you. It's so interesting to watch people get elected to local office. I mean, we're talking a town of 7,000 people. People get elected to local office, and they believe they are so much smarter the day after the election than the day before.
I remember trying to find a reason to care about Providence politics when I lived there. And all I thought was we'd be better off shutting it all down and letting it be a free-for-all. We would just be better off. Get rid of the nannies that are haranguing everybody. You know, that's just never going to happen.
No, it's not.
Therein lies the criticism of anarchism.
I would like to be an anarchist, but I'm not really an anarchist. I'm a small government person, but it's so hard to keep government small.
Starting with it at all is the very beginning of a slippery slope. And yet that first step is literally always going to happen. We're all always on a slippery slope, right? Every one of us.
And lucky for me, when I got time to decide whether I was running again, My wife told me that I had been in the city government 6 years in the council, 4 years as mayor, 10 years of my life. She said, that's a decent tithe out of your life for civic service. You don't need to do that anymore.
I mean this question with as much charity as you can imagine. I don't mean it to sound nasty at all. Did she ever bring up that maybe she didn't like you as much?
Interesting.
Well, look, you've said that you didn't really like yourself, that it was bad for you to be in this position. Were you alone in that opinion, or did other people who love you share it with you as well?
I don't think I was alone. She didn't like the Mr. Mayor Randy nearly as much as the regular Randy. You can see why it's so hard to get people to retire from politics. You think you're important. You think that you're necessary. You think you're doing the best thing for people around you. And because you're elected, you're smarter than those people around you.
I guess that is kind of hard to walk away from when you frame it that way.
Yeah.
But that's how you feel, James.
Here's the weird part. In my lifetime, there's been a change, and I think you were a mature, rational adult when this change started happening, and I don't think I was. I think I was still young. Somewhere along the way, human beings just stopped dealing with one another. I can't locate the exact time that happened, but I'm on this idiotic app called Nextdoor, which kind of unites the neighborhood in a communication web. All the thing is one person after another complaining about what somebody else is doing, saying, who should I call? And my answer is always the same. Call that person. Better yet, stop by the house.
Knock on the door.
That never occurs to anybody anymore. And I'm wondering if that was operational when you were mayor as well.
In terms of how I viewed how people interacted with each other, it started to change in the direction you're saying about 2005. That's when I noticed it, but that's when I was also mayor. But people who were just wonderful people, who took care of their neighbors, who showed up and shoveled the walk of the guy who was dying of cancer, all of those people. They show up in city council meeting and be mad at somebody and want the city to do something about it.
Everybody wants to use government to spank people they don't like.
Yeah. There was this great guy, wonderful guy. Providence is built as the valley floor goes up and meets the mountains. He had a house fairly high up, and there was a lot below him, and people were building on that lot, and they were going to be high enough that they would block some of his view of the mountains to the west. He called me and wanted me to come and make them keep their house lower. I went up and stood on his deck with him and said, look, the only way you protect that view is you buy that lot.
That's right.
I said, have you talked to those people? He said, well, they're nice people. I don't want them mad at me.
But you want to cut off the top story of their house.
Yes. He wanted me to do it, not him. People would call and say, my neighbor's dog is barking. Well, have you talked to the neighbor? No. That's what the city's for.
I'm not surprised.
This is not New York City we're talking about. This is Utah, which is like small town America.
94% Mormon.
Everybody sees each other every weekend at the church, right? It's not like these people don't know each other. But it's interesting, Randy, because you've got two distinctly different stories to tell, right? You've got this kind of nasty story about people wanting to use government to take a chunk out of each other. And then yet, the minute you try to build something like a baseball field, something that clearly everybody does not need, private money comes out of the woodwork and people can't wait to work together to make it happen. In the end, I'm left with one obvious question, right? What the hell?
I don't have a good answer. I puzzled over this one. I would come home from city council meetings so puzzled. My ego was bruised by all the names people were calling me because I wasn't willing to help them. It helped that the wife of one of our friends in the political science department was so obnoxious. She'd show up and say, I have a PhD in economics. And I'd say, well, did you get hired by the economics department? Yeah. There are times when I was not a pleasant person to the people who were complaining.
And yet you get to see their better angels if you just turn around and look in the other direction.
Exactly.
People really suck, and I'll take that to my grave. People really suck. And yet most of the time they really don't.
My grandfather said it really well one day. He said, Randy, people are just no damn good. But he lived in a little tiny town where everybody pitched in to help everybody else anytime they needed help. Human nature has some weird characteristics. To me, it means that you don't want to let government do any more than is absolutely necessary. If people want stuff, figure out how to organize and do it. Voluntary cooperation can do a heck of a lot, as we've seen in the baseball parks example.
We're nearing the end of our time here, and I want to remember that we're running this on opening day. So, this is when all things are new again. Here in January, as we say these words, I literally can't wait. And I'm in Tucson, Arizona. Spring training is in Phoenix, not 2 hours away. I mean, I wish the Red Sox were there and not down in Florida, but I'll take the Cubs out in Phoenix. That sounds great. What does baseball bring to your brain on opening day?
Anything is possible. Even the Cubs could win a World Series on opening day. It is spring, and spring's a time when things are getting green and we're thinking, hey, we made it through the darkness of winter. Life's going to be really good this year. And then baseball steps in and says, yeah, it can. And it sort of is this massive boost.
People say, where is your happy place? My happy place is Fenway Park, and it has been since the first second I walked into that building. I remember ascending the stairs. Fenway is kind of like a giant basement with a nice baseball field on top of it. And you ascend the stairs from this dank, stinky basement, and it's sunny, the greenest green I've ever seen. It explodes into your eyes. It's so green. You find your seat, and they're all too damn small because it was built 100 some odd years ago. And you start easing into the game, right? Because the game just doesn't happen. There's a whole ritual that goes on before the game happens. And then that first batter comes, and you hear the pop of the ball as it hits the catcher's mitt. You hear the umpire let loose with a call. You hear the bat crack a ball, and you know it's going far. And these are the sorts of things I think about when I think about baseball.
Last summer, my oldest grandson graduated from high school. I took him and his younger brother to the College World Series. It was magical. Ole Miss and Arkansas were playing, and those fans are crazy. Just sitting among them, wonderful things wash over you.
Randy, it was really good talking to you again.
Thank you, Randy.
Check the show notes for all kinds of interesting stuff by and about Randy.